Hello and welcome to the Cabinet Learning Series. In this video we're going to talk about management basics. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to set up users and user groups. We're going to talk about how to build repositories and cabinets. And then we're going to talk about how to assign those users rights to the repositories and cabinets. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get logged into management. Now to get logged into management, all we need to do is go to our Start button here, go to All Apps, and right under our cabinet folder where we usually go to Cabinet Safe, we're going to see a cabinet management icon. Now, if you're wondering how to get management installed, if you have Safe installed on your machine, that means you already have management. So all you have to do to get management installed is just install Safe on your machine and you're good to go. So I'm going to click on that management icon here and get logged in, and you can choose to log in as your username, or if you're the system administrator, you can log in with that user as well. I'm going to log in here, there. And the first thing we're going to do is set up users. So on the top left, we're going to come here to user settings. And right under that, we're going to see a section here for users. In that section, we'll see that it shows me a list of all the users I already have in the system. And then to add a new user, I'm going to come down here to the bottom right and click on Add. And it's going to take me to step 1. And this is going to be some profile information about the user. The first thing I'm going to need to enter is going to be their username. So let's go ahead and create a user here for Tom Jones. So we'll do T Jones here for the username. And we'll give them a license type here. And if I click on this ellipse here in the field for license type, I'm going to see all the different licenses that I have available. And I can choose from there to decide what kind of license I want to apply for this user. Let's give this user here a regular full and click OK. And then we're going to continue on and fill the rest of this information out. So I'll give him a full name here. I can enter his initials in the next field, and there we go, and so on. Now the only fields that are actually required are going to be this login name, the license type, and the password. Those are the only fields in this first step here that are going to be required to create a user. With that being said though, this email field, even though it's not required, is still very important. If you want this user to be able to receive any kind of email notifications, whether it be for a workflow notification or a scheduled item or anything like that, you're going to want to make sure that they have their email address here in step 1 of the profile. So let's go ahead and enter this person's email address. And the last step is going to be their password. So I'll enter the password here in the first field, verify it and make sure I have the spelling correctly in the second field. And then to move on to the next step, I'm going to click on Next here down in the bottom right. And the next step is going to be where I assign this user permissions in management and different settings like that. The first section here is going to be account settings. And I can choose to make this person a cabinet administrator, which will give them more access to different areas here in cabinet management. I can choose to disable this account if this is already a user created and I want to disable them. I can check that box there. If I'm using the share service, I can choose to check the share box here, and that will enable this user to then use that share service. Then moving on down, we have our password settings, and you can see here that the password never expires is set by default, so that means whatever password you set in step 1 is always going to be the password for this user. If you want to change that, you can uncheck that, and you can check the box here that says change password on next login. So that way you can set just a standard default password for this user, and the first time they log in, it's going to actually ask them to create a password of their own, and then they'll use that to log in from then on. And then the last section here is going to be management permissions. And if you'll notice, these tabs here at the very top correspond directly with the different sections here in cabinet management. So here with the users tab, we have users and groups, and if we look up on the left hand side under user settings, we see that we have a section for users and groups. If we go to the next tab that says filing, we have a checkbox for repositories, cabinets, and copy cabinets. And again, back to the left, you can see that under filing structure we have repositories, cabinets, and copy. So what this actually allows me to do is choose which areas of management I want this user to have access to. So let's say I want this user to be able to create users and groups. I'm going to want to check these boxes here, giving them access to that area in management. I can go here to filing and say I want them to be able to create cabinets. And I can go to document and say I want them to be able to create templates, maybe not managers or classes. But again, you can turn which areas they have access to on or off depending on what they need to do. So you can go through there and turn those on or off. And then let's move on to step 3. Now step 3 is where we can add different assignments. The first assignment here is going to be for groups. If we already have groups created, I can automatically assign this user to one of those groups. So let's say I know this user is going to be a part of the engineering team. I can click on that group here, click on add, and now that as soon as I'm done creating this user, that user is automatically going to be added to that group. The next tab here is for workflow, and if this area is left blank, that means that this user will be able to send an item through workflow to any user or group. Now if I want to restrict this safe user that I'm creating to specific users and groups that they can send workflow items to, I'm going to click on this add button here and choose those users and groups. And then once I choose them, this user will only be able to send workflow items to those people that I chose. And then lastly, we have restrict to for user and group list, and we have restrict to for rule list. And what that means is if both of these fields are left blank, the user will also be able to workflow items to any user or group or rule that you have created. If you want to restrict them to specific workflow users or groups or rules that you can send items to, again, you'll just click on add and choose those users and groups or rules that you want to give them access to or restrict them to. And then here in step 4, you have a summary. So then you'll be able to see what you've set for the profile. You'll be able to set or see what account permissions and settings you have set, and then you'll be able to see what assignments you set there in step 3. And then once you're done, you can go down to the bottom right and click on finish. So now I can see that user's been created and added to my cabinet users list here. And with that, we're going to go ahead and go back to the left hand side here under user settings and go to where it says groups. Now again, when I click on groups, I can see the list of groups that I already have created. And if I want to create a new group, I'm going to click on add down here in the bottom right. The first thing it's going to ask me to do is enter a repository name. So let's say I need to create a repository for my sales team. We'll just call this repository sales. The next thing I'm going to do is pick a type. And I have 2 different types to choose from. I have a CNG type and an FLO type. A CNG type is used to assign rights to. So if I assign rights to this group, any users in this group will automatically inherit those rights. So if this group has view-only rights, meaning that this group can only view documents, any users in that group will also only be able to use documents. So it makes it very easy to assign rights to a lot of users at once instead of having to assign rights individually. The next type here is going to be FLO group. An FLO group is used to send items through workflow. You can actually send an item through workflow to a group, and everyone in that group will see that item in their workflow, and then one person, whoever wants to work on it, can then claim that item and work on it themselves. But it makes it so that you don't have to worry about which individual person you need to send a document to. You can actually send it to an entire department and have them decide who needs to work on it and send it on through the process. All right, so you can choose what type of group you want there, and then you can choose an owner. Now the owner is going to be the person that actually has the ability to move users in and out of the group. So if I click on that ellipse here, it's going to show me a user list, and I can choose any user from the list. Let's choose Harold here. That means that Harold, if he logs into management, will then have the ability to add users or remove users from this group. So I can say, okay, Harold, my user here, which is Jeffrey, Pat, and Richard, are all a part of the accounts sales team. I can choose them and come down to the bottom right and click on add, and it's going to add those 4 users to the group. So since this is a CNG group, whatever rights I apply to this group, all 4 of these users will automatically inherit those rights. And then once I'm done, I can go in here to the bottom right and click on finish. Alright, so now we've added some users and we've added a group. Let's come down here to filing structure. Under filing structure, the first section you have here is repositories. Repositories is going to be where you actually store the images that are being filed into safe. So I come down here to bottom right to add a new one. And the first thing it's going to ask me to do is enter a name. So let's go ahead and enter a name here. We'll say this is a repository for accounts payable. The next thing we're going to want to do is enter a path, and that's going to be the actual location that the images are stored. Now, one thing I want to mention is that this repository section here is actually only accessible by the cabinet administrator themselves, or the system administrator, excuse me. A cabinet administrator or an individual user will not have access to this area. Only the system administrator will have access to repositories. And the reason that is because, again, we set the path here to where we want the actual images that you file and save stored. And if that path gets changed, it could mess up you being able to pull up documents and retrieve documents from the system. So you don't want just any old user coming in here and changing that path. So again, that is going to be restricted to just the system administrator. But once you have that path set, you can add some notes, and then once you're done, you can click on finish, and it's going to add your repository to the system. Now once you have your repository added, we're going to move on down here to cabinets. One thing I want to mention again is that cabinets cannot be added unless there's already a repository created, because since repositories are the highest level of our structure in SAFE, you have to have those created first, because if you go to cabinets first, there's not going to be anywhere to store the cabinets because no repositories have been created. So once you do have the repository created, you can come here to cabinets. I can see the list of all the cabinets I already have created, and then I can come down here to the bottom right if I want to create a new cabinet and click on add. And the first thing it's going to ask me to do is pick a cabinet template. All the cabinet templates down here actually have preset indexes and tabs, and they'll hopefully give you an idea of where to start if you're struggling on what kind of indexes or tabs might be set for a certain type of cabinet, whether it be for human resources, healthcare, financial advisor, things like that. We've taken what we've learned from working with all these different industries and created a best example or a template of how to get that cabinet started. Or if you want to start with a blank template, you could click standard here, and that's going to start you with a completely blank template. That's what I'm going to do now. So I'll choose that and click OK. And that's going to take me to step one for creating a cabinet. And the first thing in step one is I'm going to give this cabinet a name. So let's say this is for a company, and this is going to be for all of their different vendors. We'll say Burger King vendors. So this is going to be a cabinet for all the different Burger King vendors. The next thing I'm going to want to do is pick a repository. So if I click on this ellipse right here, it's going to show me all the different repositories I have available. And I can choose from that list. I'll choose the accounting office here and click OK. And that means that this cabinet is now going to reside in that repository. Then I'm going to choose an owner. And now the owner is going to be the person that's able to log into management and actually change the different indexes that you have set for the cabinet and the different tabs you have set for the cabinet. And you can also set a group to be the owner. And that means that everyone in that group will have the ability to come in and make those changes as well, instead of just one individual user. So you can choose who you want to be the owner depending on who you want to be able to come and make changes to the cabinet. So I'm going to go ahead and, since this is the accounting office repository, I'm going to make the owner my accounting group and click OK. So again, that means that anyone in that group will be able to come in here and make changes to the cabinet. All right, and then moving on down, we have a read-only and a document versioning checkbox. Read-only makes it so that every document filed into this cabinet is read-only and cannot be changed or not be edited or anything like that. Then the document versioning checkbox means that any document that's filed in this cabinet, period, will have a new copy of itself saved anytime a change is made. So that way you can go back to the document and see each individual change that was made to the document throughout its entire life. All right, and then moving on down, we have full text search. And what you need to do, the only thing you need to do is check this enable indexing checkbox there, and that will turn on full text search for this cabinet. You can go ahead and leave all the rest of the fields here default and ignore them. but just make sure that you have this enable indexing checkbox checked if you want to be able to full text search in the cabinet. Alright, then I'm going to come here to step 2, and this is where it's going to allow me to enter my indexes for the cabinet. If I want to add an index, I'm going to come down here to the bottom and click on add, and the first thing it's going to ask me to do is enter an index name. So let's say the first index we want here is going to be vendor name. So I'll type that in here for the index name. The next field is going to ask me to enter a data type, so I can choose which data type I want depending on what kind of value might go into this field. I can also choose a data mask, which will actually force the user to enter the information in the exact same format every time. It's not going to necessarily apply to a vendor name field, but let's say you have a date field. You can see here that we have a few different options for date, and that's going to force the user to enter the date in whichever format you choose. And the nice thing about that is if you're ever running a search on a folder or a document, you don't have to guess how the date might be formatted on that title. You know as well as I do that everyone enters the date a million different ways when they're filing documents, so this just forces the user to enter that information the exact same way every time. And then the last thing here on an index is going to be how you want the user to enter that information. You can choose user entry, which means the user will actually type in the information that they want to add. You can choose pick from list, which is where you can click this pick list button and actually create a drop down that the user can choose from to pick the value, and then you can choose both here. And the both is going to allow you to create that drop down list, but if the user doesn't have what they want to enter in that drop down list, they can actually override it and type anything they want that's not necessarily in the pick list. Alright, but for vendor name, I'm just going to leave it as user entry and hit on save. Now if you notice that as soon as I hit save, index window came right back up, and that just allows me to enter this index information a lot faster. So I can say, alright, this next field after vendor name, I want to be the address, so I'll type in address here for vendor name, enter, and it's going to pop up again and just let me keep on continually adding this index information. So then I'll say city, state, and zip, and the phone number. And phone number is going to be a good example of a field you might want to use one of these data masks on. So again, if I do this drop down here, you'll see that phone number actually has 3 different formats. So let's say I want to choose the first format here. That's going to force the user to enter the phone number with 3 digits in parentheses, which would be the area code, and then the number itself after that, outside of the first parentheses here, that would be the area code. So again, that's going to just help your search results and make sure that you know exactly how people are entering this information. Alright, so I'm going to click on save, and then once I'm done adding my last index, I can just go ahead and click on cancel on this index edit window and move on. And the last thing for step 2 is going to be here under index settings. If you'll notice that here for unique, default, and reference, the ID, which is that first index right here at the top, is set for all 3 of them. And we're going to want to go ahead and change that. Now the unique index is, you're going to want to set to something that's always unique. Now that one we could leave to the ID because we know that this ID here is being generated every time a new folder is created, and that will always be unique. You could also choose maybe vendor name or phone number because those are most likely going to be unique for each vendor you work with as well. But you wouldn't want to use something like city or state because that could repeat for different vendors. So again, unique, whatever index you have set here for unique has to always be unique, and it can never repeat on any other folder in the system. Alright, and then the next one is going to be default. And default is how the folders in the cabinet are sorted. So if I have, let's go here to vendor name and right click on it and say set as default index. That means that whenever a user opens up this cabinet, all the folders are going to be sorted by the vendor name. So when you're creating this cabinet, just decide how you want these folder indexes or folders sorted, and then just make that value the default index. And the last thing is going to be the reference ID, or the reference index. And that's going to be the second column there on the folder list. So if you log into Safe and you open up a cabinet, you're going to see all the different folders. On the left-hand side, you'll see that default index, which again is how the folders are sorted. And then on the folder list still to the right, you'll see another piece of information, and that's called the reference index. Now, right now the reference index is set to ID. but you can change that to anything else you might want here. So I could change that to phone number, so I can right click on it and say to set as reference index. And so on that folder list right away, I'm not only going to just see the vendor name, but I'm going to immediately see the vendor's phone number as well. So it's just easier for me to see that information quickly as opposed to actually having to click on the folder and then look at the folder and it's just to the right and figure that out. All right. Now, once you have your folders, your folders, but your index is created, we can go down here to the bottom right and click on next. And now I'm going to be able to add my tabs. Now, there's one tab in here by default, which is miscellaneous. You can keep that in there or you can delete it. That's up to you. But to add a new tab, all you need to do is come down here to the bottom, click on add. The only thing the tab is going to ask you for is a name. So since this is a vendor's cabinet, maybe I'll give a tab here for bills and correspondence, and so on. So I can choose as many tabs as I'd like, or as few tabs as I'd like to be in this cabinet, but you'll just add them there, and once you're done, move on to step 4. In step 4, it's just going to be a summary of everything that you've set up. So you can see here the first part of the summary is going to be that profile information, so you can see the name of the cabinet, the repository, who owns it, and everything like that. You can see what indexes we created, and at the very bottom you can see what tabs are in the cabinet as well. And then once you're done, just go to the bottom right and click on finish. Now, so far we've created our user, we've created a group, and we've created a cabinet, which is going to be Burger King vendors here. Now, one thing I'm going to show you is, let's go ahead and get logged into Safe and take a look at that cabinet. Oops. It helps if I enter the information right for the password. There we go. All right. Now, we assigned that cabinet that we just created. If we take a look back here in Cabinet Management, on Burger King vendors, we can see that the repository in this column for that cabinet is Accounting Office. Now, if I jump back to Safe, I'm in that repository, but I don't see a Burger King vendors cabinet. And the reason is because I've not given my user rights to that cabinet. Just because you create a cabinet in Safe does not mean that any user will then be able to see that cabinet. You have to first assign rights for the user to that cabinet. So that's what we're going to do next here. So what you're going to want to do is come down here under Document Settings and go to where it says Classes. And under Classes, you'll notice that there's a Folder tab and a Document tab. And under each tab, it first starts with Non-Sensitive, and then you move on down and you can see that there's a bunch of different classes that you can choose from. If I want to change the name of one of these classes, let's say under Folder here, I can simply click on the class, come over here to the right where it says Description, change the description. Let's say this is the sales team. Click on Save, and you can see that over on the left that has been changed for that class. And you can make that change here for folders or documents. And the way this works is by default, anytime you create a new folder or a new document in Safe, the class is going to be non-sensitive. So only the users that have rights to non-sensitive classes in that cabinet will be able to see that folder or document that you created. However, if you decide that you want to have different security or more granular security in your cabinet, you can create more classes here and change which classes are tied to the folders and documents. So for instance, you could have, let's say, 90% of your folders in a cabinet set to non-sensitive, and you can have all of your users, let's say, have full rights to non-sensitive folders. You can still have the rest of the document or rest of the folders, so that's going to be that last 10%, set to an HR class, but if the users that have rights to non-sensitive do not have rights to the HR class, they're not going to see those folders. They're not even going to know they exist. So it's something to keep in mind here when we're setting rights. And this is going to make a little more sense when we come down here to rights. So let's go ahead and move on down under Access on the left-hand side to Rights. The first thing I'm going to want to do is decide which cabinet and repository I want to assign rights to. So I'm going to pick my repository, which again is still going to be your accounting office. I'm going to pick my cabinet, which is going to be Burger King vendors. And once I select that, you'll notice that under the Assigned tab, no users are here. And that means that since there are no users under this list, no one has rights to this cabinet, and no one is going to be able to see this cabinet in safe until you assign rights. So to assign rights, I'm going to come down here to the bottom right and click on Add. The first step is going to ask me to pick the users or groups that I want to assign rights to. So I can click on my user here, and I can assign rights to my user. And another tip real quick is if you hold down your control key and then click some more, you can actually select multiple items to assign rights to at one time. So if you know multiple users or multiple groups are going to have the exact same rights, you can assign the rights to those multiple users or groups at the exact same time. But for this, we're just going to click on my user here and click on Next. Now step 2, it's going to talk about folder rights. And if you'll notice on the left-hand side here, we can see all those different classes that we just created in the classes section here in Cabinet Management. And so now I can assign what kind of rights I want this user to have for folders. So for non-sensitive folders, I can say I want this user to have preview rights, which means that they can only preview the folder. You can have view rights, which means they can completely view the folder. You can check edit, which means they can actually edit the information on the folder indexes. You can choose create, which will allow the user to create folders in this cabinet. You can choose delete, which will allow the user to delete folders in this cabinet. And you can choose lock, which are going to be full rights for that type of folder in this cabinet. But even though if you look here on the left-hand side now, you can see non-sensitive has access lock. And that means any folder in this cabinet that has a sensitivity of non-sensitive, this user will have full rights to. But if there are any folders in this cabinet that have HR or sales team classes tied to them, this user is not going to be able to see those because, as you can see, still under access here, it says none, which means they have no rights to that or to folders with that class. And so you can actually change the rights a user has depending on what you want them to be able to do with different types of folders. So let's say for, again, non-sensitive, they can have lock rights, which means full rights. They have access to do anything they want with those folders. And then for HR folders, maybe I just only want them to be able to view. I don't want them to be able to edit, create, delete, or lock. And then for any sales team folders, maybe I want them to be able to create, edit, and view, but not delete. So you can change those rights based on what you want the user to actually be able to do with different folders within a cabinet. All right, and then moving on to step 3, our document rights. So it's going to be very similar, but here we have our document classes. And so for a document class, same thing. Anytime you file a document, by default, that document is going to have a non-sensitive security class. But as you're filing that, you can change that to any other class you may or may not create here under document rights. So then I can decide what kind of rights the user has to those different document classes. So any document that's filed away in this cabinet, I can choose, let's say that maybe I want them to be able to create documents, I want them to be able to edit documents, export documents, and that's actually going to be one difference here between documents and folders. For documents, you can actually choose whether or not you want this user to be able to export documents outside of SAFE onto their actual system. All right, and then you have view and preview as well. So you can decide what kind of rights the user has to that specific class, and then you can move on down and go to the next class and choose rights for that class, and so on and so forth. So once we're done assigning the rights for folders and documents, the last thing is come down to the bottom right and click on Finish. And so now you can see that under the Burger King vendors cabinet, it's not blank anymore, and that my user has now been assigned rights to that cabinet. And if I go back to Safe, and I reselect this accounting office repository, I can now see that we have a Burger King vendors cabinet, and I can open that up and I can start creating folders if I needed to. All right? So to kind of sum up here, I know I've thrown a lot at you in this video, but we've set up some users and user groups, we've built repositories and cabinets, and we've assigned user rights so that they can have access to the repositories and cabinets that we've created. If you want some more in-depth and very detailed management training, we have a lot of that online and coming up here in December. So if you go to our website, there's going to be a tab at the top that says Support and Training, and it's going to have a link to these different training schedules, and you can sign up for any of the classes that you might want to attend. On December 10th, we're going to have a Management 1 training course. On the 14th, we're going to have a Management 2, On the 15th, we're going to have a management course on templates, and the 16th, we're going to have a management course on workflow. And then lastly, if you have any questions beside that, or just any questions at all, or need more information, you can feel free to contact your account manager or reseller. You can visit us at cabinetpaperless.com, or you can email us at info@cabinetpaperless.com, or call us at 800-621-6501. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. I hope you take the time to enjoy many more on our playlist here on YouTube, and I hope you have a great day.